He is the only Chinese protagonist in Japanese anime. Not only does he possess overwhelming combat power, but he can also kiss any beautiful stranger he encounters on the street. Despite appearing frail during the day, he transforms into a grim reaper at night. That evening, a man named Louis was running wildly atop a city skyscraper. Soon after, he was cornered by 3 policemen. However, as he turned around, his eyes emitted a red glow. One policeman was sent flying into the air, followed by Louis himself ascending. It turns out that Louis was a contractor with the ability to control gravity. The police used stellar positioning to track that Louis was moving northeast. He reached the top of a building in the suburbs and began breaking his fingers one by one, his only means to survive. Using his powers required a specific price. At that moment, a black cat darted past, and a man wearing a white mask appeared out of nowhere. Louis immediately used his powers to send him into the air. But the masked man, Hey, subdued him with steel wires and demanded to know where the item was. Initially defiant, Louis was violently coerced into revealing that it was with a woman, but her location remained unknown. Louis then endured excruciating torture. With the police 3 minutes away, Yin notified Hey. Having obtained the information he wanted, Hey killed Louis. As Louis died, a star fell from the sky, signaling his death to the police. Contractors emit radiation when using their powers, which corresponds to the stars in the night sky. Each star represents a contractor, thus changes in the stars can indicate their activities. As for what lies within the dark expanse of the sky, everyone who has ventured there has perished. The police were investigating Louis' death and could almost confirm it was the work of a contractor. However, there were no corresponding changes observed in the stars, and a large number of similar cases had recently occurred. Everything about the case remained a mystery, but one thing was certain. The item sought by the contractors was in the possession of a woman named Shinoda. The case was assigned entirely to Officer Misaki. As she drove by, she passed Li Shengshun without realizing that he was the Black Reaper they were searching for. Hei arrived at a rented house where the landlord mistook him for a TV repairman. However, after Hei tapped the TV a few times, it sparked and began working again. The landlord then learned he was a student from China and showed him to a room on the 2nd floor. At that moment, a beautiful woman emerged from next door. Hei took a good look at her. This woman was Shinoda. She worked part-time at a nightclub, but 2 policemen were already watching her. Shinoda saw through their disguise and excused herself from the booth, using the security staff to delay them while she slipped away. Seeing this, the policemen dropped their act and chased after her. Shinoda ran to where Hei was stargazing. Without a word, Hei pinned her against a tree and kissed her. The police, mistaking them for a couple in love, left to continue their search elsewhere.
星を見てたの。ここから見える星空は今じゃみんな偽物なのに。
After Shinoda left the scene, Hei watched her departing figure with a cold expression. Shinoda then hid in an alley. Just as she was relieved to see the police leave, a hand covered her mouth. Her colleague had arrived. Jean asked if she had the item, and after receiving confirmation, he covered her mouth with a cloth. Just in the nick of time, Hei knocked Jean down with a blow and fled with Shinoda. The two reached a bridge when suddenly the wall emitted a blue light and Jean emerged from it. He punched Hei off the bridge, then knocked Shinoda unconscious. When she awoke, Shinoda found herself in a slaughterhouse. Jean was counting stones, the price he had to pay to use his ability. He then demanded the item from Shinoda, threatening her life. In fear, she tried to escape, but the door was locked. Jean moved closer to Shinoda, but suddenly, there was a power outage. The door's lock automatically opened amidst the flashing lights. By the time they got outside, Shinoda had vanished. It was strange. The electronic door lock had a triple security system, yet it had been breached. Running in the rain, Shinoda encountered Hei again. However, she could never have guessed that Hei had been tracking her for a week. Shinoda, unguarded, revealed all her secrets to Hei and even brought him to her home. The house was a mess, clearly having been searched. Out of fear, she decided to live with Hei. Despite being alone together, they did not take any action, but instead started talking about life. Hei, skilled in conversation, said meeting her was fate, which made Shinoda's heart race. At that moment, the police arrived at Shinoda's house, hearing a noise on the balcony. They rushed over and sighed in relief upon seeing it was just a black cat. They never suspected that the person they were looking for was right next door. Hei then took Shinoda to a restaurant where he shared his tragic life story, gaining her sympathy. He then ordered a meal costing 300,000 and had her pay. Suddenly, Shinoda's eyes lost focus. She stood up and walked to the counter. A man seated behind urged Hei to hurry up and kill Shinoda before any trouble arose. Then, 2 assassins entered the restaurant and spotted the pair preparing to flee. They chased them into the kitchen and opened fire. Hei threw flour to block their view, but the assailants, being contractors, used their powers to explode the kitchen appliances, involving the chefs in the incident. However, Hei and Shinoda managed to escape. Meanwhile, having lost contact with Hei, their boss Huang began to suspect Hei had betrayed them. But Yin still believed in Hei. Shinoda bandaged Hei's wound with her clothing, blaming herself for his involvement in danger. However, Hei caressed her cheek, telling her to rest. Always considerate of her, Shinoda was moved and handed over the sought-after item to Hei. Yet, assassins, as if guided by a tracker, also arrived. Hei ran with Shinoda to the police station entrance, knocked her out on purpose, and let the police rescue her while he distracted the assassins alone. At that moment, Misaki received shocking news. Shinoda's body was found by the river. Who, then, was this Shinoda? Hei donned his coat and led the assassins under a bridge. Shinoda realized Hei had manipulated her emotions. Suddenly, an assassin shot at her, but Hei took the bullet for her. It turned out this woman was implanted with Shinoda's memories and could revert to her persona through a code. She was a trap set by Jean to capture Hei. The assassins then shot Hei again, but just as they were about to celebrate, a black cat began to speak human language. It was revealed that Hei's team was the actual prey, and the item had already been found by the enemy. Huang wondered why Hei never attacked this doll, but Hei insisted she was not a doll, but a human. John escaped via water to under the bridge, but his location was continuously tracked by Yin. When the police arrived, they found John's body. Hei's first girlfriend had passed away just one day before he cooked a large meal to celebrate, and then went to work as usual. He first stopped at a rendezvous shop to pick up a watch, then went to work nonchalantly. His job was to deliver documents to Tahara, who was also the target of his current mission. 10 years ago, over 3 million people in the city were killed, and Tahara was the only survivor. When the official rescue team planned to save him, Tahara not only refused, but also removed his gas mask and yelled into the microphone that this place was not for humans. He never discovered the cause of the city's demise, but to ensure safety, the authorities built a high wall to isolate the city. Survivor Tahara became an expert. Hei arrived at his office and deliberately knocked over the documents at the entrance. While Tahara was tidying up, Hei swapped the watch on the desk. Tahara, oblivious and engrossed in his plant research, was unaware of the impending danger. 2 assassins had already arrived at the hotel targeting Tahara. However, Kenneth was a drunkard who always needed a bottle before a mission. Luke used his powers to open the bottle for him, but the cost of using his powers was to fold an entire book. On the other side, Kashiwagi was waiting for the subway at the platform as usual when suddenly her pupils lost focus. Unaware, she ended up in an alley burning books. When she snapped back to reality, she frantically tried to put out the flames. The smoke attracted the police. At that time, Tahara received a notification from the school asking him to come quickly. He asked Hei for a ride. It turned out Kashiwagi, his daughter, had been arrested for arson. However, Kashiwagi denied setting the fire, claiming she woke up to see the flames already burning. But no one believed her. Suddenly, Tahara's expression hardened, and he took Kashiwagi and left. Back in the car, Tahara asked her when these unconscious actions had started. Kashiwagi ignored her father. When Tahara tried to check her wrist, she forcefully pulled away. At that moment, her classmates passed by on the roadside. Kashiwagi got out and walked with them. Her classmates also noticed that she had been daydreaming a lot lately and suspected she was troubled. They invited her to come over and hang out, but Kashiwagi declined, hoping her father might be home that evening. However, when Kashiwagi returned home, She was deeply disappointed to find it still empty and felt exceptionally lonely. At that moment, Tahara received a call from the assassin organization, which enraged him. He calmed down only after tending to a peculiar plant. A black cat outside the window saw everything, yet the assassins targeted Tahara's daughter, Kashiwagi. She was caught stealing a CD by the store manager. Hei stepped in to help her, but Kashiwagi was ungrateful, thinking Hei was sent by her father to watch her. However, Hei simply wanted her to be his second girlfriend. Not wanting to go home, Hei took her to an amusement park where they were the only two people. Kashiwagi was somewhat scared, so Hei asked her to close her eyes and then used his power to light up the entire park, a master move in wooing. But the loud noise attracted security. Hei took her hand and they ran away. The intense activity made them hungry, so they went to a ramen shop for a big meal. Kashiwagi was stunned by Hei's appetite, but found the night fulfilling. Early the next morning, they walked on the railroad tracks. Kashiwagi voluntarily unwrapped the bandage on her wrist, revealing a small blue dot that used to be much brighter and now sometimes seemed to disappear. Tahara had implanted it in her when she was young, calling it a talisman. Hei asked what Tahara did, but Kashiwagi knew nothing. However, after a short time together, Kashiwagi had completely fallen for him. Just as she was about to express her feelings, two assassins blocked their path. Hei grabbed Kashiwagi and they desperately ran, but there were actually 4 assassins. Hei charged at the assassins to let Kashiwagi escape. She ran to a construction site, but the assassins shot at her. Terrified, Kashiwagi froze in place. The next moment her eyes lost focus, and the flower Tahara had been cultivating wilted as if he sensed a great terror. Meanwhile, Misaki learned of a new star. When the police arrived, the site was reduced to rubble, with charred bodies scattered around. It seemed a monstrous entity had been awakened. Hei and the black cat were puzzled. Kashiwagi was supposed to be normal. How had she become a contractor? Hei thought of the blue light on her wrist, surely related to Tahara's experiments. The assassin organization also received news, making Tahara and Kashiwagi their targets. Kashiwagi, with a vacant look, wandered into a utility pole, regaining consciousness only to miss noticing a truck heading straight for her. Flames erupted, and the truck driver died instantly. Misaki was urgently searching for Kashiwagi, as her powers were uncontrolled and could cause massive disasters. Misaki then headed to the research base where an elderly woman was observing the stars from an observatory, but found no trace of Kashiwagi, frustrating Misaki. Every second Kashiwagi was unfound, the city faced more danger. Residents were evacuated in groups. In the crowd, Kashiwagi's close friend noticed her and tried to take her to safety. However, being the cause of it all, Kashiwagi refused. Unexpectedly, the friend's father insisted on taking her, leading to a tragic event. The laboratory detected Kashiwagi's location and the police surrounded the park, waiting for the special forces to arrive. However, in the next moment, a policeman's hands were severed, and his colleagues were all killed. The assassin organization had arrived. Luke single-handedly took down all the police and carried away the unconscious Kashiwagi. Meanwhile, Kenneth called to threaten Tahara while Hei was right beside him. Tahara explained that what was on Kashiwagi's wrist was a seed. Kashiwagi had always been a contractor, often starting fires as a child. But 10 years ago, after entering Hell's Gate, Tahara discovered a plant that could suppress a contractor's powers and implanted its seed in Kashiwagi's wrist. However, the seed would eventually disappear, and her powers would re-emerge. Therefore, he continued his research but never found a way to completely seal the powers. Moreover, the host of the seed became a temporal, prone to losing control at any time. He had turned his own daughter from a contractor into an even more terrifying entity. To ensure Kashiwagi's safety, Tahara deleted all related data and erased her memories with a special solution. He left the organization to prevent Kashiwagi from being used as an experimental subject. At the time, he retrieved 2 seeds, one implanted in Kashiwagi's wrist, and the other was the plant he had been cultivating, hoping it would produce new seeds to permanently suppress Kashiwagi's powers. However, this morning, that plant suddenly withered. Kashiwagi was unaware that her father, whom she had always despised, had always loved her deeply. Hei, unconcerned with Tahara's intentions, transformed once again into the Black Reaper and stormed the assassin organization's base alone. However, Kashiwagi was taken as a hostage by the opponents, preventing Hei from acting freely. Suddenly, Tahara appeared at the door, offering to exchange Kashiwagi for the research data. But Kashiwagi, having closed off her heart, claimed not to recognize him. As Tahara reached for her hand, Kashiwagi's flame powers reawakened. Tahara then threw out the withered flower and embraced Kashiwagi. He pulled out a dagger intending to end his own life, but was shot in the wrist by Luke, who then used his powers to impale Tahara in the abdomen. However, Hei took this opportunity to approach Luke from behind and killed him with an electric shock. Despite this, Tahara could not be saved and died in Kashiwagi's arms. The pain of losing her father caused Kashiwagi to lose her sanity, and her fierce flames engulfed Kenneth. Kashiwagi transformed back into a contractor, and upon regaining her memories, realized she had killed many people. However, the police were always a step behind. When Misaki arrived, she only found Tahara's body. The story takes place after conflicts in South America. Japan faced its worst nightmare ever as a British spy colluded with local gangsters, spending 10 million to find a mysterious girl. Unexpectedly, the gang leader double-crossed them, taking the money and then halting the deal. His men drew guns and threatened November to leave, refusing to return the money. November then dropped his disguise and killed all the henchmen. The gang leader realized that his opponent was a contractor and panicked, fleeing. As he ran, a woman and a child approached him. A massive gust swept towards the gang leader, and a condensed water orb from the air hit him. Soon after, the ground beneath him froze. It turned out that November had coordinated with April using their powers. The gang leader tried to shoot, but his arm was frozen. November grabbed his shoulder, and the terrified gang leader revealed the girl's location, thus losing his value and gradually turning into an ice sculpture. Using his powers, November had to pay a price, smoking a cigarette, which he hated. April's payment was drinking alcohol, which she gladly accepted. They then located Havoc's residence and delivered her to Tokyo's Pandora organization, where Havoc received the highest level of security. Because she became a contractor during the South American War, gaining the ability to create vacuums, and then single-handedly annihilated a 100,000-strong army, she shocked governments worldwide. However, since then, she has never used her powers again. Experts analyzing the light spectrum from the stars determined that Havoc had become a doll, a being without abilities. Due to the rarity of such cases, she became a subject of research. Her story still caused unease, so the higher-ups decided to send her to a secret base. En route, November and Misaki both received calls that a mysterious organization was attempting to capture Havoc. With 3 contractors present, they dismissed the threat, even boldly stating that the attackers would not return if they came. They then rested at a transfer station, where Misaki instructed her subordinates to be on high alert. However, November revealed they had already taken precautions. Havoc was right there. Although this was for safety, Misaki felt they had been played. Distrust arose between them, but they still had to continue escorting Havoc back to headquarters. Suddenly, a figure flashed by, and the driver slammed on the brakes, but there was no one around. Then, November received a call from April. July, through the glass, released observer spirits and detected an ambush. November stepped out alone and spotted a figure in black in the distance. It turned out that Hei's organization was also targeting Havoc. Everyone knew the name Black Reaper, so they prepared their most powerful moves right from the start. While Hei and November were fighting, Huang arrived by the car and released a smoke bomb that knocked everyone out. After returning to headquarters, Misaki faced criticism from her superiors. November, being the strongest British agent, was not expected to make mistakes. Misaki had no choice but to take all the blame alone. Fortunately, they were certain of one thing. Diplomatic channels were ineffective against the organization that took Havoc, indicating the enemy was not an official body. This made handling the situation simpler. They just needed to eliminate them all. Meanwhile, Hei's team had already captured Havoc. However, Hei did not follow the organization's orders to hand her over, but instead took her to an abandoned warehouse. There, he tied up his sister's best friend and tortured her. But Havoc, having emerged from hell, was indifferent to physical pain. She firmly denied any involvement in Bai's disappearance. As a contractor, they had long lost normal human emotions. No fear, no anger, only rationality remained. Yet, Hei was visibly emotional and even used his powers without paying a price, leading Havoc to question whether he really was a contractor. Officer Misaki also began to doubt Hei, as all recent cases seemed connected to the Black Reaper. What was the purpose behind his organization? At this point, November approached, wanting to join the police investigation since Havoc had been taken from him, making him the most suitable to rectify this mistake. Misaki agreed to November's involvement, knowing that only a contractor could defeat another contractor. As a Chinese expatriate living alone, Hei cooks excellent dishes. His simple fried rice brings back Havoc's fond childhood memories. Therefore, Havoc decides to help Hei and accompanies him to Hell's Gate, hoping her powers and memories will be restored, and possibly uncovering the whereabouts of his sister. However, Havoc is also worried that if she reverts to her former self as a killing machine, she hopes Hei will end her life. July and Yin have located Hei's position. They are heading to Zone 2. Misaki and her team are fully prepared, but in Hell's Gate, conventional human weapons are useless. Meanwhile, November is increasingly interested in Hei. He was sent by the organization to kill Havoc, but not only did he refrain from doing so, he, like the Pandora organization, wanted her to go to Hell's Gate. Unaware that he is being tracked, Hei continues his journey with Havoc. When they reach a metal fence, Havoc starts to shiver, seemingly recalling something, and shows an expression of extreme fear. Suddenly, Misaki receives a report from headquarters that Havoc has regained her powers. She immediately orders the special forces to deploy. When she comes to her senses, November and the others have vanished. Havoc distances herself from Hei, thinking she could become a humane contractor like him, but now her emotions are fading. She asks Hei to kill her before they disappear completely. A strong wind sweeps in, with dark clouds covering the sky above the restricted zone, and a sudden downpour begins. Havoc breaks free from Hei's grasp, stating she no longer wishes to take anyone's life. However, Hei believes that leaving the area will cause her to lose her powers, so there is no need to risk his own life. But the next moment, 3 ice spears pierce through Havoc's body. Hei watches as Havoc dies in front of him, his expression turning icy cold. November blocks the alley where Hei is trapped, confident he can finish Hei off. However, the real hunter often appears in the form of prey. November seems interested in Hei's powers and offers him a chance to join them instead of handing him over to the authorities. But Hei throws a hidden weapon and then unleashes an electric shock. November pulls out the weapon and prepares to use his power, but a fireball is shot at him. After the flames disappear, so does Hei. Once again, Misaki's actions are a step too slow, and all she can do is clean up the scene. With just one look, this man could kill 1,000 people. He perfected the art of assassination, personally killing his own brother. He then stuffed a potion into the corpse's clothing and, as if possessed, jumped from the balcony. At that moment, the supposedly dead brother stood up, and the police ruled the case a suicide. Guy is a private detective whose skills are even poorer than those of Detective Kogoro Mori, and without Conan's help, he has had no success in 30 years. Even his assistant Kiko looks down on him. Just then, there's a knock at the door. A widow has come to ask him to find her adorable lost cat. Although it seems beneath a detective to search for a cat, the widow offers a commission of 500,000, forcing Guy to accept. Before setting out, he stops at a ramen shop to fuel up, and coincidentally meets Hei, who is eating there. Hei's appetite astonishes Guy. Later, he reads in the newspaper about someone who fell from a building, ruled a suicide by the police, which makes Guy pensive. However, Kiko is fixated on the 500,000 reward, prioritizing finding the widow's cat. Unheard by Kiko, Guy suspects a serial killing, noting that each supposed suicide worked for the same cosmetics company. Suddenly, Kiko recalls that the widow's perfume is from that company, yet they don't delve deeper. As Hei leaves the restaurant, Kiko, smitten by his good looks, wishes she could devour him on the spot. Then, dressed as a Catwoman, she enlists nearby children to help search for the cat, but they show little interest, and the widow's cat remains unfound. Although Guy is engrossed in investigating cases, he discovers that the widow's deceased husband was a director of the company possibly linked to the series of suicides. He completely forgets about finding the cat and goes alone to the widow's villa. Coming to his senses, he finds a cat sitting on his lap, which triggers his fear of cats. He then uses this as an excuse to wander around the villa, actually looking for clues to the serial killings. Unbeknownst to him, Hei had already infiltrated the place and was sorting books in the study, scaring Guy away. The widow then informs him that the cat might have been taken by her late husband's ex-wife and suggests he check her mansion. Using her charm, she gets the bewildered Guy to agree to her plan. On his way there, Hei had been waiting for him for a long time. Guy senses this is no coincidence. He suspects Hei, who started working during this period, the attractive and suspicious widow, and the maid. There must be something amiss with that villa. While identifying problems is easy, solving them is hard. He would never expect that Hei had already taken action. He and a black cat end up at a construction site where a mysterious man kills his own father and extracts a bottle of perfume from his body, then intensely sniffs a strange fabric, a price for using his powers. When the man sees the black cat, he immediately runs away, but Hei trips him with a wire. It turns out the man was behind the recent suicides. He attempts to use his powers on Hei, but the black cat promptly interrupts him. The man takes the chance to flee. Hei is displeased, thinking the black cat hindered him, but the cat reveals that the man, like itself, possesses the ability to possess others. The next day, Guy calls the widow from outside a coffee shop. Coincidentally, the mysterious man also arrives there, and they both wear identical coats. When leaving, Guy mistakenly takes the wrong coat. He then spots Hei and curiously follows him, only to realize that Hei intentionally led him away to allow the black cat to continue monitoring the mysterious man. Losing track of Hei, Guy goes to the residence mentioned by the widow to look for clues but finds it filled with garbage. He reluctantly enters and mistakenly thinks the black cat is the widow's cat. While trying to catch it, he discovers a mummified corpse in the house. Fortunately, having been a detective in the police force for 2 years before becoming a private investigator, Guy is not treated as a suspect. However, Guy realizes he has been manipulated by the widow, who used the search for the cat as a pretext to send him to the mansion. The widow's and her ex-husband's mysterious deaths are surely connected. Moreover, Guy senses a larger scheme behind all this. He visits the widow's house again and learns the ex-wife's name is Toshiko, who had asked the widow to leave her husband Yuzuki. Though Toshiko is 80 years old, her presence is quite intimidating, and she does not wear perfume, suggesting Yuzuki did not dislike her natural scent, which irritates the widow. Humans are born with body odors, yet Yuzuki always insisted she wear perfume. Guy realizes the relationship between the widow and Toshiko is complex, and the widow might even be the murderer. At that moment, the maid suddenly opens the door and returns the mistakenly captured black cat to Guy. The black cat begins to worry about its future. As Guy ponders the connections between these events, he is unaware that he has been targeted by a mysterious contractor. The contractor demands Guy return his coat, but Guy's detective instincts kick in and he suspects the man might have killed Toshiko. Confused by the accusation, the contractor uses his ability without a word and instantly possesses Guy's body. Not yet accustomed to the new body, he accidentally knocks over the black cat's cage, nearly falling into the river. The black cat, seeing this, uses its ability to possess a crow in a tree and snatches the contractor's coat. However, it accidentally crashes into a bridge and, just before hitting the ground, shifts its soul back to its own body. Recognizing that the cat also has possession abilities, the contractor tries to kick it into the water. At that critical moment, Hei arrives and wraps a wire around the contractor's neck. The black cat advises him to run to a blind spot where he won't be seen, and thus can't be possessed. Hei then pulls the wire back, pinning the contractor against the fence. He glances at his distant body, throws the coat over, and instantly transfers his soul, picking up the coat and quickly leaving. Hei immediately follows, but Guy's body, out of control, drags the black cat into the water. Hei is forced to stop the chase. Guy still doesn't know he almost died just now. He asks his assistant to continue searching for the cat while he investigates the widow's case nearby. At Toshiko's house, he notices many glass bottles at the entrance and suddenly realizes something. He returns to the widow's house to confront her, asserting that Toshiko couldn't have possibly stolen the cat since the plastic bottles at her door are meant to deter cats. A person who dislikes cats wouldn't play such a prank. The widow just wanted someone to go to that mansion and discover the body, hoping they might even be framed for the murder. Furthermore, there was a witness who saw the widow near Toshiko's house half a year ago, coinciding with Toshiko's death, and the widow had a motive for murder. Guy suspects she is the murderer. However, the widow laughs upon hearing this, admitting she did visit the mansion, but Toshiko was already dead by then. Hearing that Toshiko's house had become a garbage dump, she went to verify it and was shocked by the worse-than-expected condition. She decided to go inside to mock Toshiko, but found her already dead. As for not calling the police immediately, she wanted to let the only woman her husband truly loved rot and decay. Guy doesn't understand why she would hate Toshiko so much, since it was she who took Yuzuki away from Toshiko. Yet, the widow remains calm, explaining that Yuzuki tortured her body every night. But what mattered most to him was the scent. He wanted to smell every part of his body, always covered in perfume. But the smell he truly loved was always Toshiko's natural scent. She was merely wearing the title of a wife. It seems Guy's deductions were all wrong. He didn't get the answers he wanted. Fortunately, the widow's aim wasn't to find the cat. Afterward, she paid Guy a reward of 500,000. Hei also cleared his name with Guy. However, Guy never expected Hei's identity to be more complex than he thought. He has now found information about the contractor from that night. The man's real name was Kapoor. He once parasitized Ukiyama during a mission, during which his own body was accidentally destroyed. Since then, he has been living as Ukiyama. Later, Hei, posing as Kapoor's target, met him and swiftly incapacitated him with electricity. Before dying, Kapoor took a sock out of his pocket and deeply inhaled its scent. He did not use his power, indicating this was not his payment. He just wanted to smell it because the sock belonged to the real him. The scent left on it was the only evidence of his own body, as his payment had already been made when he lost his body. The police have been gathering information on contractors recently. Under the bridge, gang member Richard met with Misaki. He had information on contractor code VI-952 and was willing to share it if his safety could be guaranteed. Misaki promised him protection. However, before he could speak, his hands were already drenched in blood. A mysterious man snapped his fingers, and suddenly 3 holes exploded in Richard's body. This was the 9th incident of a gang executive being killed, with the killer never at the scene. Misaki was very frustrated. After a year-long investigation, all she knew was the code VI-952. To comfort her, her father, the chief of police, invited her to a lavish meal at a hotel and revealed a personnel transfer. Misaki was about to be promoted to chief of police. She was advised not to handle everything herself and to delegate difficult tasks. However, Misaki became a cop to help the underprivileged, so she made an excuse to send her father away. Unexpectedly, she ran into her best friend, Alice, the daughter of a gang leader. Alice was excited to see Misaki, thinking she was there to celebrate her birthday. Alice took the initiative to bring Misaki into a secluded area of the hotel where she lived with her father, a place off-limits to anyone but gang elites. To fit the occasion, Alice dressed Misaki in a slit cheongsam. Surprisingly, Misaki, usually more formidable than men, turned out to be a curvaceous and sexy woman. What's even more surprising is that one is a young gang leader, and the other is the future star of the police force. During high school, everyone was afraid to approach her, but Misaki was the only one who stepped forward to prevent her from going astray. As a result, they became inseparable sisters. This was Misaki's first time at such a grand event, and she seemed a bit out of place. However, she was constantly observing her surroundings. At that moment, her colleague Saito had managed to disguise himself as a waiter to infiltrate the event. They were looking for clues about the target from inside, but it seemed no one knew who had killed the gang executives. Ostensibly, today was Alice's birthday party, but it was actually an emergency gang meeting. As they discussed how to proceed, Hei's stomach growled, disturbing the guests. The manager sent Hei to the kitchen as punishment, and Saito was sent to wash dishes. Unnoticed, all the security guards in the surveillance room were dead. Then, all the executives entered the meeting room together. Misaki tried to follow, but was stopped by Alice, who claimed to have more important information, such as the real identity of 952. Alice led Misaki to an indoor garden filled with stone flowers, all of which had been brought from Hell's Gate. Bees nurtured on the nectar of these stone flowers produce a special substance within their bodies. She grabbed a bee and stung herself in the arm, claiming that this would make a regular person feel like a mutant, erasing all pain and sadness. Then she tried to sting Misaki with the bee. Misaki stepped back and fell, spotting a body on the ground. It was Alice's father. Alice claimed that Wei Jejun was responsible, revealing him as VY952. After her explanation, Alice aimed a gun at Misaki, intending to kill her best friend. However, the ceiling lights suddenly exploded. Misaki took this opportunity to crawl to a corner, where Hei was also hiding. Elsewhere, the gang's top brass gathered, waiting for the boss who never arrived. Jejun confronted them directly, declaring a new era for the gang. He slashed his wrist with a dagger, splattering blood on the executives. Then, with a snap of his fingers, they exploded on the spot. Misaki was saved by Hei, but she did not know Hei was a contractor. Alice stated that even self-harm with bees cannot erase certain things in the world. Today, she planned to eliminate all emotional bonds, having already dealt with her father and the gang. Now, only her friend Misaki remained. Meanwhile, a massacre was unfolding in the conference room. Misaki was unlucky. She was not part of Alice's original plan, but happened to be there today. Alice, remorseless, advanced with a handgun. But lacking a clear shot, Misaki grabbed Hei and they fled into an elevator. Alice ordered all exits blocked. Unable to leave normally, Misaki followed Hei into the men's restroom. To prevent observer spirits from entering, Alice cut the power lines, plunging the building into darkness. However, such an act was futile before Hei. The building lit up in less than a second. Misaki couldn't understand why Alice would want to kill her. They were best friends. The taste of betrayal was bitter. Hei, showing empathy, seemed to have his own hidden stories. Now, their priority was finding a way to escape. Misaki mentioned that Hei had not been seen and could actually leave directly. However, before leaving, she wanted Hei to bring Saito. Hei agreed to her request, and they introduced themselves in the restroom. Meanwhile, the police had received information that Misaki was at a gang's hotel, where VI-952 was also located. Without a search warrant, they couldn't just storm in, as it could escalate the situation uncontrollably. Later, Hei brought Saito over. Alice, blinded by her obsession to eliminate Misaki, fell into Jejun's trap, unknowingly allowing him to handle Hei and Misaki. At that moment, Saito emerged pushing a cart, with Misaki hidden inside. He planned to get her to the laundry room downstairs to help her escape, not realizing that Hei had already disappeared. Hei went to the indoor garden and successfully retrieved the stone flower crystals. Unbeknownst to him, Jejun had seen through his intentions and was waiting there. Jejun tore off his bandage and sprinkled his blood on Hei, then snapped his fingers, causing Hei's blood to seep out. After slashing his wrist again with a knife, Jejun forced Hei to dodge repeatedly. Hei then used a wire to reach a metal frame, but before he could stabilize, Jejun's blood covered the frame, causing it to explode. Hei fell from the frame and fled in disarray. Seeing this, Jejun immediately followed, but Hei counterattacked, catching him off guard. Hei fell into the building while Jejun took the crystal. At that moment, Saito, who was with Misaki, was called away. He thought he could bluff his way through by staying calm, but was unexpectedly taken to the conference room, the site where the executives had been killed. Alice had already seen through their tricks. The gang highly valued blood relations, so whether she liked it or not, she had to inherit the organization and its vast wealth. But she wanted none of it, and decided to eliminate all ties. With Jejun's help, it was easy to do. However, she never expected Jejun to press a bloody handprint on her abdomen, which was followed by her abdomen exploding open. Jejun then stated that Alice did not seek freedom, but wanted to rely on someone, sometimes Misaki, sometimes him, while his goal was control over the entire gang. Jejun was clearly ruthless, but at the critical moment, Hei kicked Jejun down and used the blood on the floor to electrocute him. It turned out that all the blood on Hei had been his own, and all adversities were to make Jejun think he had won. Hei then picked up the crystal from the floor and jumped out of the window. This was Misaki's closest brush with the truth yet, but she also lost her best friend. The man was covered in tubes and taken to Japan's highest interrogation agency. Despite facing the world's most advanced lie detector, his heartbeat showed no fluctuations. Consequently, Hei successfully infiltrated the Pandora institution. His mission was to retrieve fragments. 2 weeks earlier, an explosion had occurred in the research institute, officially claimed by Pandora as an electrical system failure. However, an informant within Pandora reported that the accident was caused by a meteorite fragment from Hell's Gate. The organization would never abandon anything involving the gate. Pandora's staff must undergo stringent screening, and none can be a contractor. Any abnormal behavior leads to a medical examination by the inspection department. Hei, despite being a powerful contractor, passed all tests and was assigned to the cleaning department. Newcomers are advised not to overreact to frequent mysterious phenomena here. The staff comprises top-tier scholars requiring the best service. No one can leave within a month, even in death. Hei was assigned to Area 3, usually cleaning during the research-free late hours. He noticed a telescope in one room, but the supervisor said not to clean there because the room's owner was troublesome. When research director Sergei arrived at the lab, assistant Mina accidentally bumped into Hei, scattering documents everywhere. Hei and the supervisor quickly helped her gather them. However, Hei received a note telling him to meet in room A3 in an hour. It turned out Mina was the insider planted by the organization. Although she belonged to the organization, she had been here for 2 years and was now focused solely on her research, offering little help to Hei. Hei indicated he wouldn't rely on her but wanted to learn about the fragments. Mina was also unclear about the details, but knew that a similar substance had been found in South America before it disappeared. The data left from that time suggested it could aid in uncovering the secrets of Hell's Gate. Although Mina's information wasn't very valuable, Hei learned one thing. The stickers on their necks couldn't identify who was a contractor. They were just a scare tactic by Pandora. At night, when it was time to clean, Hei approached the telescope, but was stopped by the room's owner. However, observing stars was Hei's hobby, and the sight of the telescope made him eager to use it. Nick, realizing they shared this passion, invited Hei to the rooftop to stargaze together. At that moment, the stars in the sky were all artificial. Since this starry sky appeared, life had become chaotic. But this was one habit Nick did not want to change. He encouraged Hei to try looking through the telescope, but Hei saw nothing. Then Nick urged him to forget everything, to forget they lived in this fabricated world, and to believe that this sky was the same one they had gazed at in the past. Miraculously, Hei truly saw the universe. Nick explained that this place was inside the gate where the impossible could happen, opening up new possibilities for the future. If everyone could experience what they were experiencing now, humanity could reclaim the real starry sky. However, Hei could not have imagined that among those who entered the institute with him, Moku was experiencing mental issues. She saw 3 ghosts following her constantly and even yelled at the air. This was the price of working inside the gate, making it nearly impossible for her to reintegrate into society. Later that night, Moku entered the room and began tampering with the telescope. Suddenly, there was a noise at the door, but she noticed nothing unusual. Then, someone grabbed her neck and killed her. Hei was unaware of what had happened, yet he was accused by the supervisor of being the suspect. Hei was taken back to the interrogation room where intense lights shone directly into his eyes during a harsh interrogation. However, the lie detector showed no fluctuations, and Hei was released. Still, he did not gain the upper management's trust, but was instead closely monitored by the supervisor. Mina called Hei to the data room suspecting him of being the murderer. Hei had no reason to kill, but do contractors even need a reason? They are emotionless machines. Hei showed impatience, which shocked Mina. She had always thought contractors were heartless. Who then killed Moku? Hei approached Mina, urging her never to act alone. Meanwhile, the higher-ups discovered Moku was a CIA agent sent to steal goods, but they couldn't find where she hid the items. The base then announced the start of a search within the surveillance camera domain. Observers often see different things, so to gather as many results as possible, all staff from Sector 3 were summoned. Nick assured Hei to be at ease as he had been through similar experiences and affirmed the experiments were safe. Then, the exploration vehicle inside the gate began to move, only to find a bottomless pit ahead, indicating the maps need to be redrawn. The exploration vehicle backed up to take a route to the west. When Hei looked at the center of the screen, his breathing suddenly quickened, as if he saw something terrifying. It was his long-lost sister. Back then, the sky was not yet replaced by a fake starry sky, and people could still see normal meteors. But in an instant, the false starry sky appeared, and his sister disappeared. When he regained his senses, the scientists were in a meeting. The supervisor apologized to everyone immediately, and then took Hei out. Later, Mina went into the men's restroom to find Hei. It turned out that everyone at the base who went mad had seen devastating hallucinations like Hei. Mina wanted to share some of Hei's pain. If he went mad now, she would be dismissed without any achievements. But Hei reassured Mina that any issues were his own, and the organization would not trouble her since they had no expectations of her from the start. Later, Nick met with Hei in the room. Nick was assigned to retrieve suspected materials from the restricted area and gave Hei the telescope before leaving. However, Hei could not have anticipated that Mina almost compromised his big opportunity. She learned of Moku's death from the supervisor and suspected that the shoes turned upside down might be the price of a contract. But such actions could be dangerous, especially with someone watching everything from behind. If she really stayed, she should focus on her own work and avoid unnecessary actions. Suddenly, an alarm sounded at the base, and all team members involved in the analysis were called back to the lab because the exploration team had sent back footage. People exploring outside were screaming and running away. All text in the footage was reversed, but one thing was common. The bodies had their shoes turned upside down next to them. Everyone gasped in shock. Surprisingly, Nick had returned alive. The leader of the exploration team wanted to continue the investigation, but the director refused. He would not allow such meaningless sacrifices again. However, the team leader was anxious because he had superiors above him. If he didn't find the meteorite fragments quickly, his life would be in jeopardy. Mina met with Hei again. She began to suspect Nick. Why was he the only one who came back alive? And why was there no footage of him in the video? Shoes were turned upside down everywhere. So this incident was not caused by the gate. It must have been something Nick did. But having worked with Nick for many years, she knew he was not heartless. She had never suspected he could be a contractor until she met Hei, a man gentler than anyone else. Hei also lost sleep over this matter. Meanwhile, the team leader was preparing his weapons, eyeing Nick as his target. Nick arrived at the abandoned mansion and was just about to open the storage locker when the team leader stopped him, intending to retrieve the items inside himself. However, Nick's eyes flashed red, and he electrocuted the team leader in an instant. After handling everything, Nick was surprised to find Hei watching nearby. He then took out a piece of the meteorite and revealed that he was employed by the CIA. He explained that if he could obtain materials from inside the gate, he could return to work at NASA. He felt out of place here. His personality didn't suit the machinations where research results were taken by those above, and he was kept in the dark about what other groups were working on. This only took him further from his dream of reclaiming the real starry sky and showing the universe to his sister. Although his story seemed incredible, it was the truth. He noticed that Hei was similar to him and might understand his perspective. However, Hei had seen contractors increase their powers with the fragments to the point of losing control and turning on each other. He did not believe Nick's claims. The artifact could not reveal the real starry sky. Regardless of Nick's previous talks about dreams or his sister, it was all false. Contractors simply cannot dream. They shared the same abilities, so neither could harm the other, and they ended up playing a game of chase. Surprisingly, Hei saw his sister under the bridge and instinctively walked out. Nick suddenly appeared, pressing against the back of Hei's head. They really were alike, not only in their emotions, but also in their powers. However, he paid no attention to the green light emanating from the fragment in his pocket. Suddenly, the fragments resonated, and a blue light transported them into another dimension. Nick began to reverse in age, turning back into his 8-year-old self. Nick truly went towards the universe with his sister. When everything returned to normal, the meteorite fragment was in Hay's hands. By the time the researchers arrived, Hay had already hidden himself. The next second, another mole from the organization appeared. The project director was actually part of the organization. Nick's situation deeply concerned Hay. What exactly was his organization hiding? Would the real Starry Sky ever return?